Hello, Internet Traveler, and welcome to the Psychopomps podcast, episode 1. Is this the actual first episode? No, it is not. Is it the first publicly released episode? Abso-frickin-lutely. It's taken us a while to get here, but we're finally here. It's going out on the internet. In this episode, you can expect your co-hosts, myself, Seb, and Tom, to talk about the name of the podcast. We don't actually decide on psychopomps. I only discovered that term this morning, but it's an interesting conversation nonetheless. And I recommend you have a Google of psychopomps. Pretty interesting. We then move on to the project that I've been working on recently, the roadblock that I found there. We talk about how the internet has impacted gaming. We talk about Brene Brown and her book that I've been reading and managing expectations in your life. We talk about the painful reality of finance over humanity in the current day and age in which we live. Nice little bit of broad scale sociology, I suppose. There we go. Tom gets a bit salty about Billionaires too. Stay tuned for that. That's always fun. We get into off-grid living, talk about my love affair with Runescape, and then we have a nice reminder not to take things too seriously. And yeah, that pretty much sums up the episode. I hope you enjoy. The audio quality isn't the best. I apologize for that. Bit of a dodgy internet connection on my end, but it's not terrible. Other than that, welcome to Psychopomps Podcast, episode 1. If I say something and people just sort of like accept it, I'm always a bit like, whoa, hang on, no, don't trust me.
Yeah, I'm not Google, I just make this shit up.
Yeah. I just present topics quite blatantly in a discussion, but like I'm not trying to tell people that I'm right. I'm just like very direct in opening up a discussion, and sometimes it's misinterpreted. But I feel like with you, we never have that problem when we're talking. And so I feel like something to do with our conversation style would be good for the name of the podcast. And I was thinking like the Headstrong Nerdcast.
We are headstrong.
Exactly. Headstrong, I think, is pretty good. And there's also a vibe of like being thoughtful, I suppose, because it's like your head is strong. If you're mindful, it's like exercising your mind, so your head is strong. So it's sort of a bit funny double meaning. Not to say that we're wise gurus that are completely strong of the mind.
No,
I don't.
My mind's fragile at best. I like it. I like the idea of coming up with a word for the both of us. Didn't I? Let's have a think.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's an idea presented for the name of the podcast. Currently, we are yet to launch a single episode, even though this is probably like the
8th.
Yeah. We're going to be very well practiced by the time anything actually makes it to the internet.
Yeah. Well, I hope. We might not sound fine-tuned at all because we've just made 8 episodes of garbage.
The last episode was definitely garbage.
Oh yeah, it was chaos. It was an hour of absolute bedlam. And we're going to format this as a couple of questions from you, a couple of questions from me, and interspace with our usual tangential nonsense.
I think that sounds perfect. But another thing I've realized since the last episode is I think I wasn't in a great spot to have lots of interesting stuff to present to the podcast last week when we chatted, because I hadn't done like a great deal of relevant reading. I'd just been like indulging in fiction and stuff, and just like hadn't learned much in terms of that to chat about. And I hadn't really been working on any cool, interesting projects because I've been taking time off from work. So I was just a very like vacant mind, which was nice. But like I've been working on a project today, and I've been reading a spiritual themed or sort of someone described it as like consciousness work. I think I mentioned this last time on a podcast. I've been reading a book sort of in that as well. So now I feel like I've got like great podcast material inside me. So I guess keeping some of that up between like episodes of the podcast, at least for me, is really good because I feel like that brings stuff into my mind to talk about, which just makes the whole thing more interesting, I suppose, and gives me a good reason to actually try and work on stuff and explore interesting topics. So it's a win-win. Win-win.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of that. I'm excited to hear what you've got to say. It will be interesting. Yeah, I've been reading some things recently and listening to others and thinking about the usual amount. And yeah, I haven't like. Oh no, let's start with you then. And did you want to do that intro that you wanted to do? Oh, we don't have a name.
Let me just Spotify search Headstrong Podcast and let's just see what comes up.
Okay.
Headstrong Podcast. Each week, our goal is to motivate you, inspire you, and get you to take action in your life, whether you're feeling stuck or stagnant where you are. I sort of hate that. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna hypnotize you into being the best version of yourself. Oh, you're not a famous actor or you're not like a world-class athlete. Oh, well, that's a shame. Tell you what, listen to this podcast and we'll hypnotize you and tell you the secrets for how you could be better. But it's like, come on, man. Like, people are already good. Like, they don't need to change. Maybe they could, I'm sure they could be nicer, bit healthier
Yeah.
mentality, but like striving to just be better in your eyes. Is that ultimately what they want? I don't know. Feel like you understand exactly where I'm getting at with that, and that's
Yeah.
a mute point. So, go ahead.
What about in the abstract?
In the abstract.
Yeah, it's it's a phrase that means, and I'm quoting this from Google, in a general way without reference to specific instances, which I think is a pretty good analogy of how we talk.
So there's a podcast called The Abstract Podcast, but I quite like that. Abstract is nice. What about Abstract Minds podcast is already a thing, but that sounds quite pretentious. So let's read Abstract Minds. Curiosity wins. Two friends look to share their views and experiences on worldly topics for each show, taking an abstract perspective to seek more understanding along with a camaraderie that's part of the journey. I mean, that actually sounds like you and me if we had our shit together.
Yeah, and I could write a better thing than that, but
well, tell you what.
Well, let's do what we usually do, and let's just chat until an intro feels right, because we tend to pick a phrase from the thing anyway. So.
Oh yeah, and didn't we say last time we would the person editing would record the intro anyway?
Yeah. So we'll find out what the name of the episode is during, and
yeah. So you probably already heard the name. This whole discussion has been pointless because the name was already said at the start of the episode. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I'm just going to dive into this thing that I wanted to talk about then. So today, I've been working on this project. I've been thinking about this project for a while, and I've had a good time, but I've hit a bit of a roadblock. And so the project in my mind was going to be a sort of 20 questions-esque web application called How to Build. And you would go to this application with an idea of what you want to build. And you go through a series of questions, and the application, the experience basically asks you like, is your application going to have a front-end interface for users, or is it going to just be like programmatically interacted with? And you say like yes or no. So okay, what platforms do you want to run your application on? Will it have like cloud-based data services, like a database for all your users across multiple devices to connect to, and stuff like that? So it's sort of like internally building a specification of what your application is going to be based on the answers that you provide to like a set of questions. And then it might then find some like well respected and like well used like popular libraries to make development easier. And if you, depending on how you want to deploy it and depending on how big you want to make it, it would also recommend different ways that you could launch it, not from a marketing point, like purely technical standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it sounds like it makes sense. So it doesn't actually build the websites, it just tells you, it signposts you to how you should build it.
Exactly. But then I did some research and sort of thought about it a bit more. And there are already tons of like web repositories basically that house all of these like just curated lists of lots of different tools and programming languages you can use and stuff like this. So it didn't make sense for me to create another data set of recommended tools to use and everything when there's already data sets of recommended tools that are maintained by far more people. But now that I'm trying to pull in other data sources, I'm basically like recreating a weird search engine / like questionnaire thing. And I'm like, hold up, is the intention here to just make another search engine? Because that's probably pointless and that's not solving the original
No.
problem that I set out to solve. And this is just a typical thing that happens in like Cody tech projects where like you start getting into it and then your mind just wants to like keep building and keep overcomplicating. And I feel like that's what I'm doing. Like software developers just love to overcomplicate and build intricate, complex stuff when really there was a simple solution that did 90% of what you wanted it to do in like a tenth of the time. Well, I think through talking about that, I've basically landed on the conclusion that I should just build it off my own knowledge and not bother doing this complex pulling data from all these different sources stuff. What do you think?
It depends what you want it for. Like, what its purpose is. Is it to present all the data that's out there and exclusively that data? Or is it designed to, just flag up to a new designer what language they need to be using, what framework would suit it?
Yeah, exactly. It's more the latter.
It's basically just standardizing the introduction bit.
Well, yeah, I just feel like when you come into the world of software development and you're like, I don't know, if you've got an idea and you think, oh, I'd really love to build this little thing, and you just want to find out how would I build that? You know, you just want to get an idea of how complex this thing really would be.
Yeah.
And so I just want to make a simple experience that will basically ask you questions about your idea and then come back to you being like, okay, well, you're going to need this to do this, this to do this, this to do this. At this point, you're using quite a few things in terms of like your cloud infrastructure. So it'd probably be helpful if you used this to sort of like track it all and stuff like that. And it will allow people to basically see like, oh, wow, this is like a big complex project. Maybe I can simplify it in a way, or like it will manage their expectations of what do they need to know, or what would the people they're working with need to know in order to make this a reality, instead of just blindly believing that they're going to make a Netflix clone. But I guess also it will help introduce beginner developers into like new technologies that they may not have thought about yet.
Yeah.
But like if they want to build something, they know how to code, but they don't know how to do a specific part of it. This tool might be like, oh, okay, well, for this aspect of your application, you probably want to use this. But there's just so many things that do so many things in the world of software that like it's so hard to even comprehend how you'd recommend specific things for each like part of the development process. So I'm trying to like standardize a flow, like how do apps get made? What's the sort of standard flow? Could I map out that flow and then ask questions about each stage of it to the user to figure out what they should do at that stage, or if that stage is even relevant to them? it's yeah, man. It's like I thought this would be pretty simple, but my mind feels like it's been exploding this afternoon. I went down an absolute rabbit hole on the internet. I ended up right. Get this. I ended up on like a fan page, like a internet community that just revolves around building Game Boy applications. And I was
I
like,
love it. I love it.
yeah.
Where did you find this? I love Game Boy. Nintendo plug.
There's a Nintendo plug, yeah. Sponsor us, baby.
Please.
There's a website called, or a GitHub repository called Awesome. It's like Awesome Lists, and it lists just like lots of awesome software tools that you can use. And I was just like looking through that, poking around, thinking like this could be a data source where I'd get solutions that I could recommend to people from. But there was so much stuff on there. And one of the things I found was this like Game Boy development community that exists to this day. It was actually pretty awesome. These guys took like a Game Boy engine from like 1989 when the Game Boy Color first came out.
Yeah.
This like Game Boy game engine, like this code base, was being passed from like person to person. Someone in like 2004 updated it and like made it a bit more efficient and created like streamlined development processes for new people that wanted to get into making games. So it was a bit less complicated. And then some company bought it. It became closed source for a while. It moved on hands to another person. And then eventually somebody open sourced it. And now this whole community is like built around it. And they just like making Game Boy games.
That's dope.
I know.
I love Game Boy games. This is something I've thought, and I'm going on a tangent already. I can feel it. But like, I loved my PS2 and I loved my Game Boy Advance and like all that sort of stuff as a kid. And I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily enjoy the new ones more. I don't think all of the graphical improvements and stuff have necessarily moved like storytelling and gameplay on in any particular way, other than it looking a bit flashy. Like, I could still get invested in in the Nintendo games. Like,
you know what I would also say to that point is, as well as graphics being worse. Sorry if I just interrupted you and cut you off there, by the way.
No, I'd stopped.
No. Okay. Sorry, I just caught myself and I was like, hang up.
No, you got that one right.
Yeah. So as well as the graphics like improving, but that not making a difference, I think one thing that has like actually contributed negatively to the gaming experience has been the internet, which I know you'd be like, what the hell?
No, I 100% agree. Online multiplayer has fucking killed good storytelling.
Yeah,
it's all about light up boxes and new skins on the latest American gun wank. It's just
and like, look at this flashy new thing. You can get this if you pay us £10 more. It's just like it's all become like they're just hacking into the dopamine response system in your mind. Yeah. I'm talking way out of my arse here because obviously I do not know a single thing about neuroscience, but like, the dopamine reward system I feel like is something that is frequently talked about at the moment. So I'm not going too far out of a limb by assuming I know a thing or two about it, I guess. But I also just feel like if you play a game as well, as soon as there's a hard challenge in the game that might take you like a few attempts to figure out, instead of slaving away at it and figuring it out for yourself and completing the game at your own pace, like the default response now is just Google a guide, get someone to tell you how to do it. But then you're not actually earning your satisfaction from the game. You're just like receiving a small little dopamine hit of like, okay, yeah, I got past that level, onto the next level. But you didn't get past that. You didn't earn that dopamine response. It just dulls down the whole experience instead of being like a rich puzzle for you to like really throw yourself into and be so satisfied when you eventually crack it. Instead, it's just like you just sit back, you're sort of watching a movie, and when the movie needs to buffer, you just head to Google and figure out how to stop it buffering and then keep going. It's like it's become super casual. It's like this zombifying effect.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, it just makes it such a money grabbing thing, and it's just a bit rubbish. Like, like we love playing Smash Brothers together, like the GameCube Smash Brothers, and that was perfect because you got all the characters in game by like completing the game. You couldn't buy in it. You couldn't cheat to have the best shit. You had to earn all the characters to play with your mates.
And I love how, like, if you're really stuck on a level from like some obscure GameCube game, like, you're gonna have to do a bit of digging to find some sort of guide or solution to that. So if you really wanna like cheat and use the internet to sort of help you out and tell you what to do, then at least you've got to do a bit of digging and a bit of problem solving to actually find what you need on the internet.
If I got stuck on a game as a kid, I could ask my older brother, who was 10 years older than me, like, can you help me out with this difficult bit? Like, you can always call your older brother in. I mean, he used to absolutely kick my ass at FIFA.
Mate, I had a younger brother that would kick my ass at FIFA. I have two younger brothers that would kick my ass at FIFA. That was pretty painful. Like, they'd rinse me because they were like sort of the football like crowd, and so
how did you let that happen to them?
Well, I mean, I couldn't control who their friends at school were. You know, while I was off being like a nerdy skater boy, they were off like turning into little football hooligans. And yeah, so FIFA was like the main game of choice for them. So after a few years of us all like playing video games, they started to just vastly surpass, like just outperform me in FIFA, to the point where I just didn't want to play FIFA with them anymore because it was just not fun. It was like I couldn't. My pride as the eldest, I just couldn't take it.
It's funny. All right, we'll move on. What's the spiritual thing that you've been listening to? Reading?
It is a book called that I've been reading with my eyeballs, and it is called It's called Let Go of Who You Think You Should Be and Embrace Who You Are, by this author called Brené. I forget her surname right now, but if you search Brene.
Brené Brown.
Oh, it might be Brene Brown, but it's Brené with a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brené Brown. That's it.
Yeah.
You know of her?
Yeah, she did some cool TED Talks. She talks a lot about courage and vulnerability, and why vulnerability is important to connection and fundamental human things. Yeah, I've read one of her books as well. She's an interesting woman for sure. Especially the way she presented herself on TED, it was interesting. But yeah,
interesting. I should check out her TED Talk. Well, it sounds like you already know a lot of the sort of content of this book that I'm reading, because what you've just said about compassion, vulnerability, and how that affects your ability to connect with other people. I mean, that's literally what the first chapter of the book has really been talking about. One thing that she really talks about, which I now can't stop thinking about, is shame. She's a big researcher of shame.
Yeah, that's how she got into it. Her first TED Talks about that, and her second talk's about that as well, because she didn't realise how popular her first talk would be. She thought maybe like 5,000 people would see it, and like 500,000 people viewed it on YouTube, and she was like thinking of ways to. You should watch the TED Talks, but she basically talks about how wanting to break into the servers and get the video back. Yeah, her discussion on shame is really interesting.
And that's exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
It was a point that I was actually going to bring up as well to you, so I may as well bundle it in at the same time as talking about how you think psychology and psychiatry and philosophy and spirituality like interconnect. So how she can do this work on shame and those sort of things, but how those things can be true and spiritual things can be true, and kind of how to balance the two ideas, because one is science effectively, arguably.
Yeah, but great scientists throughout history have like been very, very religious. And I remember at school that was always like presented as a, can you believe it? This expert scientist is religious. You would have thought they were rational. And it's like, it's just like, yeah, they can appreciate and understand the rational world, but also see through it to understand that there are fundamental laws that govern the universe we live in, and they had to have come from somewhere. So, does that not intertwine with spirituality in a way? Like, it may disagree with some of the more what's the word I'm looking for? Some of the more derived religious theories, such as like God built the world in 7 days, that sort of thing. But you don't have to necessarily believe every story to be religious, So I think they can definitely coexist.
Yeah, I was just thinking how like the using psychology in your kind of meditation practice almost. So acknowledging
Right.
feelings and learning techniques to deal with them, and being able to borrow from kind of modern science and old tradition.
And then like potentially seeing interesting ways that like an old Buddhist meditation practice or some like Taoist philosophy or such, like actually they wouldn't have really understood psychology from the scientific standpoint that we currently look at it, but they might have had a practice that sort of can be measurably shown through modern research techniques to be very constructive and positive to the human psyche. So it's like they sort of intuitively knew what was right, while we're now sort of logically deducing what's right.
Yeah, I think we detached ourselves as a people when we did the Enlightenment, industrialization, killing God thing. I think because you're right, as in school and things, and I was a adamant atheist as a teenager and a kid. I thought it was nonsense and science was the only way to go. And then as an adult, I've kind of seen the world that science has built and gone, not sure
Yeah,
huddling around banks is any better than huddling around churches. But at least one
and
you can get out in nature and have an excuse to go and have a party.
and we've created this in this modern world of banks and finance and careers and like mortgages and whatever, this idea of the expectation of life and this like universal pressure to conform, which this conversation comes straight back to Brené's book, because she talks about not doing what you think people want you to do, this idea of what you should be doing that you've sort of built up over time through the different various social pressures and what you've learned about what's expected of you. And some things about what's expected of you naturally fits, and it feels right. It feels right to expect to be polite to people, having a few
Yeah,
table manners and such. Like that is stuff that is expected of you. But in that environment, those expectations actually help everyone have a positive time. So you can be aware of that expectation, but you don't have to sort of fight against it. But then
but
there are some.
expectations are only important when they're optional. If something becomes a necessity, then it inherently it takes away from the value of it. So even with manners, they're only important because you choose to show them. You could eat sloppily or be impolite in any other way that you choose to be. The important bit is the fact that you have to acknowledge your choice in your actions and the consequence therein. So being and again, Brene Brown will talk about it, but it's the same in like the Bhagavad Gita when you have the right to your actions, but not to the fruit of them. Like you just have to make the best informed decision that you can, but it is always a choice, and that's what gives human choice actual weight and levity.
That is such a good point. And I guess what we experience now a lot of time is things are expected of us that we don't feel like we can choose to make happen. We're expected to do things that are out of our control almost. Like in a world where money makes money and where nepotism is one of the most driving forces behind the success of any individual, then if you feel pressure or you feel there's an expectation of you to become a successful human being, a lot of that is out of your control. And that's a vast expectation that you've sort of taken upon yourself to fulfill. Like, oh, I need to create something good. I need to be able to measure myself as a good human by these, like, by this criteria that is based upon money or academic success. But a lot of that is out of your control. So how you can't make that, like, you can't make that gracious decision to say, like, I will do this. You know.
Yeah, I just think it's that. Yeah, it's important that you. I think, yeah, there are still obligations, and you are pressured into things, and some things are out of your control, like you say, and you have no choice about that. They just are. But that means they're fundamentally unimportant. Like, although they're happening, they, yes, we're connected to everything, but your immediate universe is basically what's observable to you. That's the only evidence of anything you have. And everything else is just, yeah. So
I could really do with getting that into my mind. I feel like it's nice talking to you about it. And it's funny because I remember you saying before, when we were doing a bit of like commercial work together, towards the end of last year, I remember you talking about how you were really excited to start working on this project that we were working on at the time. And like, we were in a fortunate position where the company that I was a part of, we had some money that we could pay you, so we could actually like engage in a like business relationship that felt pretty cool. But I remember you raising a sort of not what's the word, concern, there we go, that you were like, I don't know how to do this without sort of it becoming an egotistical thing. I don't know how to start working on this without being driven by my ego. And I remember at the time being like, well, like, your ego does serve you some good and it shouldn't be entirely ignored. Sometimes your ego sort of, it pushes you to do stuff because it wants you to be better. But by pushing you to do stuff, it can actually help bring like positive change to the world, even if that comes from a slightly selfish place. And I stand by that thought. I think it's an interesting hypothesis, but I also think there are things that you will naturally want to do. There are things that will feel right if you do it. And if you really engage with it, you can come away feeling really positive about what you've just done. Feel like you've done something really nice for yourself that was creative and potentially going to positively impact other people. And it feels correct, just feels right. And I guess that's what we all want to aim to do. And I feel like when you, like, I actually got to be in like a private conversation with a billionaire towards the end of last year through the business course that I did in London, which was freaking awesome. And hearing him talk, I had the expectation that this billionaire was going to be this like really selfish, greedy man. And you know what? He probably is a bit of a selfish, greedy man. But what he definitely also was he was just himself, and he loved business. He loved business. He just wanted to make like commercially successful, profitable businesses. And the way he viewed the world, like what he naturally was led to, was that he wasn't trying to shoehorn himself into this like idea of the billionaire. Who he was destined to be a billionaire. And I was just watching this like, I'm not mad at you. You're a billionaire and I'm not mad at you. This is weird, you know?
To have that much profit and live that lifestyle, it relies on everyone else having to live a different way, and it's what causes a lot of the agony. I don't think ego is the way for everyone to be happy. It might lead to a few billionaires, but not whilst there's still people starving. Like, you shouldn't be able to hold that right whilst there's still such inequality. I know it's a free market, but being a billionaire is knowingly disregarding humanity as a whole.
I think so. I agree with that.
How many schools and hospitals could you build with billions? Like, it's like hoarding wealth. Like, what's he going to do with those billions? Invest, and then his children will invest, and then what? It just gets locked into a family line. Like, it's just hoarding is why we have such inequality now. It's why there's a 1% and 99% that are just trying to get by at the indifference of people that have that personal wealth.
I would propose like a counter argument to this, that I don't think hoarding is the reason why there are people suffering. I don't think it's a zero-sum game in terms of how wealth is distributed. I don't think billionaires being richer directly means that the bottom 1% are poorer. But I do think that a lot of businesses and a lot of like sources of income that drive like the immense wealth of billionaires comes from, I think, like, people in society think they need take bank loans, think they need to buy the latest iPhone. You know, there's like very successful marketing and materialistic consumer behavior that really drives this idea that like we need to keep consuming. And as long as there are people that are desperate to keep consuming, there will be people that are like, all these people just want to buy shit. I'll create all these different ways for them to buy stuff and make them believe that they should be buying it all, and I'll get all their money, you know? So it's like billionaires existing is a bit of a crime, but the way that society functions, we enable billionaires to exist in a way.
Yeah, I'm not denying that they're entirely enabled. If people wanting stuff isn't bad, people will always want for things. Like, that's just what humans are like. And yeah, you can make loads of money off of it, but in doing so, you start to segregate people into the worthies of having things and the worthies of not having things, and your whole merit system is based upon a monetary system imposed to keep a structure in place that isn't to the value of everyone. I might have been destined to be successful, but he chose money to be successful in. He could have probably been successful doing other things like lobbying against, deforestation or something, but he chose what he thought was the correct thing to do. And I'm not, people are entitled to their own motivations and things. I just think that it's a cruel system. And I know that's not an original thought. It's just, it's just the ignorance required to maintain a system as fundamentally cruel as it is just astonishing. But that's why I find relative calm within my spirituality and try and think about this sort of stuff less. Because he might be a billionaire and that's how he does his life, but he's still just a human being, and that was how he will always be, and that's how he'll finish, and that's the same for me and you.
Exactly. But I think he probably knows that is the thing. Like, I'm sure he's aware that like his life doesn't revolve around money, and that the health and well-being of himself and his family and the connections that he maintains with his friends and the good that he can like do unto others that he passes by in his life are all of equal importance to how much money he makes. But I think at the same time, we're all shaped by our environment, and we're all shaped by what we know, and our personalities. We don't have to be malicious to be greedy. And I feel like you would argue that some people who are a bit sort of stingy and don't like to spend money, if that's if that's someone trying to look after a family and they don't have tons of money, then you would say, okay, good, that man is stingy, but that's good because he needs to look after his family. And if he wasn't stingy and was spending money left and right, he might not actually be able to provide to for his children. So it's a good job that he's being stingy. But as
Yeah,
soon
but
as that man becomes
why
wealthy,
is the system built in such a way that he has to do that in order to keep them safe? Like,
yeah, that is the true
we're a bunch
tragedy.
of social monkeys that fail at being social, and it create these situations where that can happen. It's completely opposed to how we're built, and that's why it feels wrong. But people do it because you still get like the dopamine hit of success because it's like a hunting conquest or anything like that. It's the championing thing. And yeah, it's good that there's a bit of that in people, but fundamentally there is enough to go around. So why isn't the system implemented in such a way as to let enough go around?
It's
Surely.
like we created this sort of like competitive playing field for all of our egos to wage war against each other that doesn't result in any harm. It's like we've created this competitive landscape to compete with each other that doesn't need to mean any harm, but because we haven't been able to actually provide everyone with like we haven't been able to meet the basic human rights for all humans, we're sort of like living in this competitive landscape where it's like revolves around money, but at the end of the day, if you can't make money, there's a chance you'll die, at which point the game is not fun anymore, you know? So
Yeah, no, I get that. It's just the what did, I remember what I was going to say when you said what you said, and now I've forgotten again. Oh yeah, I know.
oh,
Cool.
okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
So yeah, that competition can only exist when there's surplus, like there is. If there was just enough to go around, you couldn't have competition because without you would only have what's the point? You'd have to take away from people directly knowing that would make them go hungry. So if there was a group of 10 of you and one of you had all of that, they'd have much more than the rest of the group, and that just wouldn't work for that person's survival or the group's survival. So there would inherently be a sharing. But when there's this surplus, these extra billions seem unimportant because most people have more than enough to get by in their immediate community. It doesn't show that your actions are actually directly affecting the world's wealth. People get that position of power and think without them the whole system would fall apart. But that's why they hate unions and things like that, because it demonstrates that actually if a percentage of your workforce is unhappy, because if a CEO is unhappy, they could fix it. If a percentage of your workforce is unhappy, they have to grumble and go along with it. So it's not equal, and that's why they can enforce unequal pay.
Yeah.
Whereas when you can unionize and things, if a whole department's go on strike and can't be fired because of a genuine grievance, then there would be. But that's not how the system's set up. It protects the inequality, because especially whilst you can still inherit, because you say this, but large portions of the wealth in this country have been inherited from other people. Like we still have a monarchy like
that doesn't pay any tax.
Yeah, she hasn't come up with a brilliant idea. She just got born in the right place at the right time to be the queen queen of England. Like it like doing inheritance like that, it prevents the protection of the most vulnerable, because if that just went all back into the system, then you wouldn't have anyone struggling. But instead it can be protected, and it gives societal divide, and is generally bad for people.
So do you think there will be a time in your life where you will want to live the sort of like gypsy nomad lifestyle, where you're just in a small community, you don't align with any like country or like state of any kind, you just exist in some land, look after yourselves, you can maybe still engage with like larger society, but
I'd like to there's a construction method called earthships, and you can basically make a really efficient, really eco-friendly house that's built into the earth pretty much. And there's mathematics with the angle of it, so it optimizes the sun, so it maintains its heat and things, and has glass and
Ooh.
So not necessarily a nomad, but I definitely like to be in a position where I was self-reliant, just because, and in a way that wasn't detrimental to my surroundings, because
Mm-hmm.
that's part of why we're in this position. And I think if more people just disengaged and went, I mean, you can still earn money and do those sort of things, like that. You can still do it that way, but you can make sure you spend your money on products that support just just good products, basically, rather than Amazon and Jeff Bezos and all the other sort of super villains.
Yeah, it would be so nice to just have to like make do for yourself, and I think that's the type of living that most of us are just not used to at all. But funnily enough, this brings me to RuneScape, which I've been playing a lot recently, and I've really enjoyed making an Iron Man account in old school RuneScape.
Cool.
I don't know if you're familiar with an Iron Man, what the account means.
Yeah, it's permadeath.
It's not permadeath.
Is it not?
There's hardcore Iron Man, and if you die as hardcore, then you lose your hardcore status. So that's sort of like permadeath. But Iron Man in RuneScape means that you can't trade with other players. You can still obviously interact with other players. You can speak with them. You can like allow them to give you information on where you should go. You can go into dungeons and like attack monsters with them, but you can never trade with them. You can never sell another player anything. If you want something, you have to basically make it yourself or find out how you can get that item yourself from the game. And so it like massively slows down the experience of playing, but it makes you have to be self-sufficient, and it makes you think about every item in a different way. Because when you get something, you can't just think, oh, I'll just sell this because I know it's valuable, and then down the line, when I need it again, or if I need something similar, I'll at least have the gold from it, and so I can then buy whatever I need with gold. It makes you get something and you think, ooh, like even though this has taken up a space in my inventory and is therefore going to like slow my XP per hour in my current fishing grind that I'm going on, it's worth keeping this because I don't know when this might come in handy, and it just like changes your mentality to the game. And I've really enjoyed it, and just the thought of like self-sufficiency is just, yeah, it matches up with how I've been playing RuneScape, and it's like it feels nice. Like I don't know, I feel like being a self-sufficient, like just for a while, just having your own little house, having your own plot of land, being able to farm, plant some trees, like retrace your or cover over your tracks, sort of thing. Reap what you sow. Is that does to reap what you sow? Does that mean to plant what you take?
No, to reap what you sow. So to sow is to plant stuff, and to reap it is to harvest. So you basically, so it's just reaping your rewards after.
I've got the wrong end of the stick on that one then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Basically, that RuneScape bit seemed relevant, but I feel like it's sort of relevant. But
I might have gone way too deep with the angry billionaires thing. It's something that bothers me occasionally. I try and keep it contained.
I think that's very clear. It's something that bothers you, but I think it's something that bothers everyone because there's like vast inequality in the world, and it seems like a logical position to think like, well, if we just gave these enormous piles of wealth out to everyone, surely that would just rid the world of a lot of problems that we have. But I don't actually believe that's true, and I don't mean to say that some people don't deserve to be given a helping hand. They absolutely do. But I think billionaires are billionaires because they're hyper responsible with their money, and they're very smart, and they know how to create value that people will want to buy. So I think there's greed involved for sure, but I think it's just very smart people interacting with a free market. But if anything, it really shows how free and open the market is, in that there isn't someone saying like, nope, you can't be this rich. Like, we're going to cap you here.
But it's not an open market. Like, it's not accessible to everyone.
That's true.
It's why, like, even the Robinhood trading platform thing, and stuff's going wrong. Just like,
true.
I like the fact that just an anarchist movement on Reddit decided to cause this much fuss. Like, if they can do that, then clearly their systems are not as strong as they think they are. They think that they can protect themselves against anything, but yet a few rogue people, like boosting a share, suddenly freaked everyone out, and it's like, well, then your ship's not.
There's a word for what you're talking about, and I'm trying to remember it, but it's like our economy is based off a there's a term for this, but it's like basically you supply only what's needed, and so you base your like stock off what you assume people are going to want to buy, and you assume that it won't matter if you go out of stock. So it's like you only keep what's needed to be as absolutely lightweight as possible, because if you keep your business as lightweight as possible, you can extract the most amount of value from it. Whereas if you try and like boost up your wares, assuming that like if you've got 100 million users buying shares every month, then you might expect, okay, that'll go up 10%, will allow a 10% margin, when maybe realistically you should allow like a 100% margin. But like, we just operate on small margins at the moment because it means people can extract money. But like,
yeah, a lot of the rules changed after 2008 though, on the amount of liquidity that you were forced to have, and it also limited in some aspects the risk banking and things could take.
right.
But the banking system's weird, especially when you look at those sort of things, because you have commercial banks and like high street banks, and then you have like high lenders, and then you have like shadow banks that operate all of the money. They're the people that, you know, get the big payouts for mortgages and things like it. Yeah, so, and that was part of the problem in 2008. So banking, like the liquidity you required to have as if you were a lending firm. So if you need a certain amount of liquidity to fulfill your buying orders, then you would need right. enough liquidity. You would always need enough liquidity to pay everything. I think it's basically how it works now.
Which I guess is why Robinhood would have had to have stopped buying in a way. It's like they had to meet this regulation, but they probably should have been. They probably should have had more liquidity to mean that they wouldn't have like hit the regulation limit.
Yeah, because it's not like it's the first time trading's had to stop. Like when markets crash, people they have to stop buying and selling. So controlling it in that way isn't unusual. So I just think doing it as an individual company rather than as a response to a crisis. Like, yeah, it's just, this is the thing. Money's fictional. It's the whole system's, although the science behind it is very real because it's behavioral economics and those sort of things, but it is based on just human need. It's weird.
Money is fiction. Well, I feel like that's a nice note to wrap it up on. We've been going for nearly an hour, but I feel like we've covered some pretty interesting ground. I think we went in on billionaires for a while.
I think maybe we might have to fix that in post. It's interesting now that I'm not editing. I'm like, well, I want to have an opinion. I'll let Seb make it marketable.
All right, cool. Well, I've been Seb. You've been Tom. It's been real.